Angrily reproached by her father for letting him escape, she parries the blow by a falsehood. He said unto me, Let me go. Why should I kill thee? On this somewhat mean conduct of hers a light is incidentally shed by the mention of the image which she placed in the bed in order to personate David. What sort of image was it? The original shows that it was one of the class called teraphim, images which were kept and used by persons who in the main worshipped the one true God. They were not such idols as represented Baal or Ashtoreth or Moloch, but images designed to aid in the worship of the God of Israel. The use of them was not a breach of the first commandment, but it was a breach of the second. We see plainly that David and his wife were not one in religion. There was discord there. The use of the images implied an unspiritual or superstitious state of mind, or at least a mind more disposed to follow its own fancies as to the way of worshipping God than to have a severe and strict regard to the rule of God. It is impossible to suppose that David could have either used or countenanced the use of these images. God was too much a spiritual reality to him to allow such material media of worship to be even thought of. He knew too much of worship inspired by the Spirit to dream of worship inspired by shapes of wood or stone. When we read of these images we are not surprised at the defects of character which we see in Michal. That she loved David and had pleasure in his company there is no room to doubt. But their union was not the union of hearts that were one in their deepest feelings. The sublimest exercises of David's soul Michal could have no sympathy with. Afterwards, when David brought the ark from Kirjath-Jearim to Mount Zion, she mocked his enthusiasm. How sad when hearts, otherwise congenial and loving, are severed on the one point on which congeniality is of deepest moment. Agreement in earthly tastes and arrangements, but disagreement in the one thing needful. Alas, how fatal is the drawback! Little blessing can they expect who disregard this point of difference when they agree to marry. If the one that is earnest does so in the expectation of doing good to the other, that good is far more likely to be done by a firm stand at the beginning than by a course which may be construed to mean that after all the difference is of no great moment. If the title of the 59th Psalm can be accepted as authentic, it indicates the working of David's mind at this period of his history. It is called Miktam of David, when Saul sent, and they watched the house to kill him. It is not to be imagined that it was composed in the hurried interval between David reaching his house and Michal sending him away. That David had a short time of devotion then we may readily believe, and that the exercises of his heart corresponded generally to the words of the psalm, which might be committed afterwards to writing as a memorial of the occasion. From the words of the psalm it would appear that the messengers sent by Saul to apprehend him were men of base and cowardly spirit, and that they were actuated by the same personal hatred to him that marked Saul himself. No doubt the piety of David brought to him the enmity, and the success of David the rivalry, of many who would be emboldened by the king's avowed intention to pour out their insults and calumnies against him in the most indecent fashion. Perhaps it is to show the estimate he formed of their spirit, rather than to denote literally their nationality, that the psalmist calls on God to awake to visit all the heathen, prowling about the city under cloud of darkness, coming and going and coming again to his house. They return at evening, they make a noise like a dog, and go about the city. Behold, they belch out with their mouth, swords are in their lips, for who, say they, doth hear? Thus showing his estimate of his enemies, the psalmist manifests the most absolute reliance on the protection and grace of God. But thou, O Lord, shalt laugh at them, thou shalt have all the heathen in derision. Because of his strength will I wait upon thee, for God is my defense. The God of my mercy shall prevent me, God shall let me see my desire upon mine enemies. He does not ask that they may be slain, but he asks that they may be conspicuously dishonored and humbled, and made to go about the city like dogs, in another sense, not like dogs seeking to tear upright men in pieces, but like those starved, repulsive, cowardly brutes, familiar in eastern cities, that would do anything for a morsel of food. His own spirit is serene and confident. Unto thee, O my strength, will I sing, for God is my defense, and the God of my mercy. It may be that the superscription of this psalm is not authentic, and that the reference is either to some other passage in David's life, or in the life of some other psalmist, when he was especially exposed to the ravings of a murderous and calumnious spirit, and in the midst of unscrupulous enemies thirsting for his life. The psalm is eminently fitted to express the feelings and experiences of the Church of Christ in times of bitter persecution. For calumny has usually been the right-hand instrument of the persecutor. To justify himself, he has found it necessary to denounce his victim. Erroneous opinions, it is instinctively felt, are no such offence as to warrant the wholesale spoliation and murder which vehement persecution calls for. Crimes of a horrible description are laid to the charge of the persecuted, and even where the sword of persecution in its naked form is not employed, but opposition and hatred vent themselves on the more active servants of God in venomous attacks and offensive letters, it is not counted enough to denounce their opinions. They must be charged with meanness, and double-dealing, and vile plots and schemes to compass their ends. They are spoken of, as St. Paul and his companions were, as the off-scourings of the earth, creatures only to be hunted out of sight and spoiled of all influence. Happy they who can bear all in the psalmist's tranquil and truthful spirit, and can sum up their feelings like him. I will sing of thy power, yea, I will sing aloud of thy mercy in the morning, for thou hast been my defense and refuge in the day of my trouble. But let us return to David. Can we think of a more desolate condition than that in which he found himself after his wife let him down through a window? It is night and he is alone. Who could be unmoved when placed in such a position? Forced to fly from his home and his young wife, just after he had begun to know their sweets, and no prospect of a happy return. Driven forth by the murderous fury of the king whom he had served with a loyalty and a devotion that could not have been surpassed. His home desolated and his life threatened by the father of his wife, the man whom even nature should have inspired with a kindly interest in his welfare. What good had it done him that he had slain the giant? What return had he got for his service in ever so often soothing the nerves of the irritable monarch with the gentle warblings of his harp? What good had come of all his perilous exploits against the Philistines, of the 100 foreskins of the king's enemies, of the last great victory which had brought so unprecedented advantage to his reign? Would it not have been better for him never to have touched a weapon, never to have encountered a foe, but kept feeding that flock of his fathers, and caring for those irrational creatures, who had always returned his